What is the misunderstanding that keeps diabetics in the diabetic range? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Here's another individual who says, why is using insulin to bring down your glucose after a heavy meal of carbs bad for you? Well, that's a good question. I will say this, if you need insulin, then it's a good thing to use. But to eat high-carb meals and then take more and more insulin is not considered a healthy thing by the people that I most respect. And the number one individual I most respect in this area is Dr. Richard Bernstein, who is a type 1. He's been taking insulin since he was, 16 years old or so, 14 maybe. And his number one reason why you should not eat high-carb meals, you should limit the carbs to about 12 grams of carbs per meal, about 30 grams per day. His number one reason is you cannot precisely anticipate how much insulin, pre-meal insulin, you'll have to give yourself. It's impossible to be precise with high-carb meals. You'll get it wrong every time. You'll either give yourself too little insulin and your blood sugar will spike way too high, or you'll give yourself too much and you'll have one of those terrible hypos. You just can't be precise enough. But if you keep your carbs low, you can be much more precise. And even if you don't quite get it right, you won't go too far out of bounds either way. So you can have people like the young man, I think his name was Dykman, Richard Dykman, or maybe that was the dad. But anyway, the young man we had on here that was a type 1, David, I think his name was David Dykman. Richard, I believe, is the dad. He said he couldn't even remember the last serious hypo that he's had. And for most diabetics, they're having hypos 2-3 times a week. And it's terrible. And I used to have natural hypos, not because I gave myself insulin, but because my blood sugar was just bouncing too high and then crashing too low after every high-carb meal. When I finally cut the carbs, that all resolved itself. So according to Dr. Bernstein, the biggest deal in his mind is that when you give yourself high-carb meals, you cannot properly give yourself pre-meal insulin. You can't exactly match it. But there are other doctors that will say something beyond that, and that is, such as Jason Fung and different ones, too much insulin is not healthy for you. It is destructive. I love the way Dr. Michael Eads put it. He says insulin in small amounts is needed. It's important. It's valuable. It's good for us. But when you put it at high levels, it becomes a rogue hormone. A rogue hormone, or you might say it passes over to the dark side and becomes destructive. Your body was not made for high levels of insulin, and you are destroying yourself. A lot of times we only focus on the high blood sugar. High blood sugar is a problem, no doubt about it. Ask any type 1. They're not making too much insulin. They're not making any, and they still got all kinds of problems. So it's wrong to say that insulin is the only issue. High blood sugar is a big deal. But high insulin is also a big deal. And a lot of people have both. They've got sky-high blood sugar and they've got sky-high insulin, and they're both acting terribly destructive to their health and their bodies. And I'm convinced that in my case, in those early days, I was getting things like the arthritis. I still have not the pain so much. The pain's almost all gone, but I've got the bumps in my fingers. That's from my 40s. And I'm convinced it was because of the sky-high insulin levels. As I was having big spikes, but it was always coming down. So my fasting glucose was okay, my A1C was okay, but I was spiking like crazy and creating high insulin all the time. So, number one, you can't be precise in your giving yourself the proper amount of insulin before meals. And number two, you're just giving yourself way too much insulin. It's not healthy for you. It's not good for you. So the best thing is to go very low carb. And then you know that you give yourself less insulin, obviously, before a meal if it's a low-carb meal. This lady says, for several weeks, I tested. Well, I love it, love it, love it. Many surprises, but one stands out. I ate 2 scones with blueberry jam one day. My blood sugar roared up over 10 millimole. I'm in Australia, so yeah, I am assuming that's high. I love scones. Later, I tried eating 1 scone with jam, thinking, well, okay, if 2 bump my blood sugar up this high, I can cut that spike in half by eating just 1. She says, but after my test, this time my blood sugar rocketed to over 11 millimole, higher than the 2 scones before. And she says, on 1 scone. The only difference she could think of is on the 1 scone day, she used plum jam. On the 2 scone days, she used blueberry jam on those 2. So the sugar content in the plum jam was much higher than in the blueberry jam. She says, moral of the story, and this is very smart, give up scones. Yeah, actually there are low-carb, almond flour-based scones that are good. I actually enjoy them, and I did a video about that. But yeah, normal scones, no. Keto scones, sure. This is so basic. Some people act like, oh, keto, low carb, dangerous. What is kind of a radical answer is that? Well, it's nothing radical about it. It's just simple. It's just smart. If you've got a light switch in your house, and every time you turn that light switch on, it gives you a powerful electric shock and knocks you to the floor, then you better do something about it. Who wants to get shocked every time you turn the light switch on? Let's say you call several electricians. None of them can fix it. They say, I'm sorry, you'd have to just destroy the whole house, rip out all the electrical, start all over. You can't afford to do that. So you say, well, what do? I know what I'll do. I'll just keep getting shocked. No. How about this? How about just not touching that light switch? You hook up some other lights. Find some other lighting system. Use other switches. Don't touch the one switch that's going to knock you down and destroy you or mess you up badly, give you a terrible shock. Why don't you just stop doing that? Now, that's precisely the position a diabetic finds himself in. He finds that carbs do a number on his health and spike his blood sugar terribly and spike his insulin terribly. And the simple answer, I know this is not very profound, and, you might say, well, Dennis, you're a simple guy. Sure I am. But sometimes simple is the best thing. The simple answer is, if carbs are that much hurting you and that destructive to your health, to your body, your fingers are hurting you, your edges of your fingers are numb, your legs are cramping, your toes, your feet are hurting, you can't hardly sleep from the pain, your eyes are getting blurry, you're peeing constantly, you're saying, what's going on? Your doctor says your liver is failing, your kidneys are failing. Well, how about this? How about stop flipping that light switch up and down all the time and destroying yourself? Sure, it's simple, but it definitely works. And we get testimony after testimony of people saying, oh, I feel so much better. Well, they stopped touching that stupid light switch and they feel a lot better. And for the diabetic, for most of us, it doesn't matter whether it's a potato light switch or a candy bar light switch or a piece of pie light switch, things with sugar, things with high carbs, or rice, bagels, they all give us that shock. They all hurt us and damage us and destroy us. So we've got to not just give up the sugary desserts. We got to lay off the starches. And that's really one of the keys that people don't get. And a lot of people say, well, I'm a good boy. I'm a good girl. I don't eat sugary desserts anymore. But they'll stuff their plate. They'll fill their plate with rice or potatoes and big chunks of bread. And since they don't have a sweet taste, they feel noble and righteous and wise because they're not eating anything sweet. They're eating starches. Well, guess what? Your body can hardly tell the difference between a piece of bread and a piece of cake. Very little difference as far as your body is concerned. Carbs is the name of the game, whether they're coming from the sugary desserts are the potatoes, the rice, the breakfast cereal. A lot of people are eating things like Wheaties or Mueslix, feel so healthy and so righteous, and they're destroying themselves.